Hey, Bitcoin wealth builders, Simon Dixon here, and welcome to episode 81 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. Today, we're going to be talking about this week in macro, this week in Bitcoin, and this week in geopolitics, as always. And the main topic of today is, has America sold itself, and who has it sold itself to? I'm going to be going through all of that today, and that's going to be the overarching theme in both the Bitcoin side, the macro side, and the geopolitics side. I do have to tell you, if you've been watching the last few episodes, bragging rights, everything has been going the way that I said it would eventually go. So I think you're really prepared, and I'm going to get you more prepared for what I think comes next so that we can make decisions and we can review it each and every week. If you are new to the show, welcome to Bitcoin Hard Talk. This is where we prepare you for a world of Bitcoin AI and CBDCs, and we cover the most important events and share this journey together so that we can be prepared for what goes next. This week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, this week in geopolitics. And today the title is The US Just Got Bought and Palestine May Finally Be Free, which we'll be covering in the geopolitics section. So without further ado, let's go right in. As I said, if we have not met already, my name's Simon Dixon. I spent the last 25 years obsessing over the topics of investing and money, and for the last 14 years in Bitcoin, after speaking at the first Bitcoin conference and investing in over 100 different companies in the sector. So without further ado, let's go straight into part one, this week in Bitcoin, where we'll be covering this week's events. And in the macro section, we're going to be going through Trump's speech in Saudi Arabia, as well as all the key macro indicators that let us know whether we're moving in the direction of this multipolar world that I've been preparing people for. And then in part three, I'll be going through the latest geopolitical events. And it was absolutely a real game-changing week this week. But at the same time, the massacre is still continuing, and the humanitarian crisis is as unbearable as it has ever been. And so we'll be going through that and where I think this actually goes next. So let's jump in with part one, this week in Bitcoin. So firstly, there was a company called Griffin Digital Mining, which is a public company that is engaged in Bitcoin mining. And it was announced that they're doing a merger with American Bitcoin. And American Bitcoin is essentially the Trump family's Bitcoin mining company and a partnership with Hut 8. Hut 8 was involved in utilizing the assets from the Celsius bankruptcy in order to build a mining company called Ionic Digital, which is meant to be going public later this year. They're still going through the audit process for the victims of the Celsius scam. And the Celsius scam we covered last week, Mijinski got sentenced for his 12 years for the scam there. And the lesson of that, as always, is own your own Bitcoin, own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month, and recognize that there are many, many different companies that want to get in the middle between you and your Bitcoin. But Bitcoin gave you the freedom where you don't need to do that. But it is also secured by proof of work. And proof of work is the world's largest distributed supercomputer that has mining across the Middle East, mining across America, mining across China, Russia, Iran, and everywhere across the global south as well, so that no one political entity can control the mining. And it is the world's largest distributed supercomputer. And so one by one, all countries are capitulating to that reality. In Abu Dhabi, you had the infamous Phantom Mining public company, Bitcoin mining. And now the Trump administration, through his family, are launching his Bitcoin mining company, which is American Bitcoin. It was a merger, and 98% of the company will now be owned and go public. And they're looking to create another Bitcoin mining company. As the Trump administration, if you followed the money that we're always talking about, essentially he's launching stable coins so that you can receive the yield on the government debt, which is almost like going short the dollar and then using that yield in order to buy Bitcoin so you can go long Bitcoin. And so what we do at Bitcoin Hard Talk is we follow the money of the politicians rather than listen to the politicians, because it is always the complete opposite of what they're actually saying. And so there will be another Bitcoin mining company, and I'm sure they'll be using the mining infrastructure that's been set up in Texas, which is making the grid more efficient, because when you have excess capacity, you can use that excess electricity capacity to mine Bitcoin, and it can pay for ever more renewable energy and a lot of innovation when you can repurpose it, which is what we're seeing across the world right now by being able to utilize Bitcoin mining. And with that in mind, we're seeing more and more MicroStrategy, now called Strategy, Michael Saylor type companies that are looking to create new, using the debt capital markets and the equity capital markets in order to give people more exposure to Bitcoin from within a public company infrastructure. If you watch previous episodes, and you can go back to my YouTube video, my YouTube channel, Simon Dixon on YouTube, and you can see where I've covered how to not get yourself caught in the middle of too many of these companies. But the creator of the largest annual Bitcoin conference, David Bailey, he used to be involved in the Bitcoin scene in China. Now he's involved in America, and more recently the Middle East as well. Well, he's launching his new public Bitcoin company. So that went public this week. I'm not sure if it owns any Bitcoin yet, but it looks like he's going out to try and raise 300 million. I think that was doubled as well. So there's going to be a lot of these, and there are a lot of them coming. At the same time, you've got more and more innovation in the stablecoin side of the business. So MoonPay, which is an easy mechanism for onboarding, offboarding via card payments from fiat currency to Bitcoin and crypto. It announced MoonPay announced a partnership with MasterCard now, and they're going to be integrating with stable coins. Now, I did go through the interviews and I tried to figure out what exactly is it doing with these stablecoin payments, because the reality is that if you're a merchant and you want to accept stablecoin payments, which is a digital dollar that anyone can spend and can be sent, on a blockchain without a bank in the middle, then you just need a QR code and you can just do it through your phone. You don't really need it integrated into one of those point-of-sale terminals that people tap with their phone. But maybe it'll be integrated into those point-of-sale terminals. I'm not quite sure what the point of those are in the future. I think everything will be done in mobile and new technology, and you don't really need the POS. But what is it going to be doing with stable coins? Well, I'll keep watching and I'll give those updates, but they were a little bit light on the detail. But essentially, they pitched it as you'll be able to spend your stable coins in 150 million businesses globally now. And obviously, if you can spend your stable coins, you should also be able to spend your Bitcoin as well, if you want to do that. So we'll keep watching that. But stable coins are 100% going to be an integral part of the strategy. And the Trump administration is divvying up those stable coins to all their buddies so that they can find a new mechanism for issuing a stable coin with the technocrats and Trump's own company, World Liberty Financial, backing it by the dot and by the debt and treasuries, just like Tether does via Cantor Fitzgerald, whose founder is Howard Lutnick, who is the Commerce Secretary. You can see that, and Cantor Fitzgerald is a direct bond dealer for US debt. And so you can see through this mechanism, they're building a way of being able to push out more US debt to the American people now that foreign investors are investing less because of the trends that we've been talking about, and I'll continue to talk about in the macro section. So stable coins are an integral part of it as well. More and more public companies. It is getting bigger and bigger and bigger as the world races to try and get those Bitcoins, which is the theme. And I want you to make sure that you are, however you're doing it, eventually that you're self-sovereign. You own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month, and you're holding it in self-custody, rather than having a middle person hold those Bitcoins for you. We also had an announcement from Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong. Full disclosure, many years ago, I invested in Coinbase when it was a public company, when it was a private company, rather, in the early days. And it went public for $100 billion. Basically, is now that public company has become big enough where they're now in the S&P 500. So this is now the first Bitcoin crypto company in the Standard & Poor's 500 index, and that starts next Monday. The implication is that when people buy the S&P 500 ETFs, which is a way of passively investing by handing over all of your voting rights to the exchange-traded fund issuer, like BlackRock and every institutions, this is how they gain significant power. But when you do that, they have to buy all of the companies in the 500, the S&P 500, and it's weighed across that, but it adds more liquidity to those stocks, and you end up with more buying pressure as a result of those ETFs and more selling pressure if it goes on the reverse side. I've covered Jack Mallers, who launched 21 Capital. That went public, and now they bought the first 4,812 Bitcoin, which is worth $458 million now. Again, I'm just telling you what's happening. The main story for me is not that I'm going to be engaging. This is a way of getting leverage exposure, but you're adding key person risk in the middle between your Bitcoin. Now, they may be able to do more interesting stuff. They may be able to access more capital when they use the equity capital markets and the debt capital markets to raise finance and therefore increase the price at a premium to Bitcoin. But then you've got another strategy in the middle. So that needs to be risk managed if you're engaging in these things. My suggestion is everybody just needs to get Bitcoin first. And then you can get more advanced and understand more exotic strategies. And I covered in previous videos and previous episodes what can go wrong with these as well, and how you can create the systemic risk event that I've been warning people against. I believe that will happen eventually. I don't know the timing on it, but it is building an infrastructure with more and more of these companies, integrating it with more and more stablecoin, because I think they want to rug pull you and get your Bitcoin. And we saw exactly how that worked in 2022. When the Fed did a series of events and an operation called Operation Choke Point 2.0 in order to crash the market, then recover the market. And those that had Bitcoin outside of the ecosystem were fine. But those that were stuck in some of these centralized companies ended up in a disaster situation. Another company that I invested in early as private equity that is now public, Robinhood. They made an announcement that they have acquired Canada's leading crypto trading platform. I think it's called what is it called? WonderFi. And so that is Robinhood. Also acquired another company I invested in back in the day, the largest European exchange. Invested, I think it was way back over 10 years ago now, which was Bitstamp. So they're taking many of these exchanges and rolling them up into these public companies, and the industry is consolidating more and more and more as the sector gets bigger and bigger and bigger. One of the public companies in Brazil, Malias, I may not have said that correctly, but they're also doing the Bitcoin treasury strategy in Brazil. You're getting them all around the world popping up right now. They announced that they bought $28.4 million worth of Bitcoin, and that becomes Brazil's first Bitcoin treasury company, essentially. And so what these companies are doing is they're holding their reserves in Bitcoin to remain sovereign, and also it underwrites to the value of Bitcoin part of their company while they have trading activities that allow them to take those dollars or their local currency and then hold it in Bitcoin and give people exposure to Bitcoin indirectly as well. So that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we're seeing more of those launch all around the world. There was an announcement on the BRICS side from the central bank of Russia, and it reported within its financial statements that Bitcoin is the top performing investment of 2025. If you want to see that report, I published it on my X account. Follow me over on X, and you can get updates in real time. And on the other side of the proof of weapons network is the Ukraine. Ukraine made an announcement today that is looking at that is at the final stages of preparing a bill to create a national Bitcoin reserve. Now, this one's a bit strange because obviously Russia has a sovereign central banking system, and it has national assets like oil and natural gas and various other rare earths. And so those countries that have their own resources are able to use those assets in order to purchase Bitcoin strategic reserves. The problem with America at the moment is America has a twin fiscal deficit and trade deficit, and therefore purchasing Bitcoin strategic reserves is challenging at the federal level because they don't have the reserves, because they export dollars around the world, and so therefore they're in debt. And they have a debt-based Ponzi scheme through the Federal Reserve System that requires them to continually increase the debt. And basically the dollar is debt. And so if you try and pay down that debt, you crash the economy and create a depression. Even though politicians will tell you they're trying to pay down the debt, it's just not possible. And so now they've hit a 125% debt to GDP ratio, which does not include the additional 250 trillion of committed liabilities that America has right now for Medicare, Social Security, interest on the debt, and the war machine that the military industrial complex benefits from, which props up the dollar proof of weapons debt-based Ponzi scheme as well. And so for Ukraine to do that, because Ukraine is fully vassalized, Ukraine was obviously targeted by the proof of weapons network. The CIA launched operations in order to vassalize it. And now approximately 50% of all the land and all the assets are owned by BlackRock, because BlackRock, through controlling ETFs and managing all these pensions, is able to create a shadow government that is way bigger and way more influential than the actual government. So the actual government works for BlackRock. I covered this whole structure last week. If you didn't watch episode 80, I covered how it's BlackRock versus the world. And BlackRock's a metaphor for a more complex structure, but let's just use the word BlackRock for now. But you can go back last work and you can see that. And so now they use war through the deep state and controlling intelligence in order to aggravate these wars. But now Ukraine is just, carved up for BlackRock, for the UK, which is essentially a vassal state for BlackRock portfolio companies as well. They were securing the land and country in order to borrow more, in order to send more money to Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic, and Raytheon, so that you could take and steal money from the Europeans, the Brits, and the Americans, and send it over to those large corporations so that BlackRock's portfolio companies could increase in value. And when you vassalize a state like Ukraine right now, where essentially they're just negotiating, US wants all of its rare earth minerals, not for US, but for its corporations that need those rare earth, which are BlackRock portfolio companies. And then BlackRock gets the most, the land, and then the rest of it goes to Russia, which is the operation that was set up. They also get to remove the dependency of Europe from Russia, so that they could end up buying the gas from the natural gas companies in America. So, this is how the proof of weapons network works. The country no longer becomes about you. It doesn't become about America first, Britain first, European first. It just becomes about you becoming a pawn for narratives that justify the proof of weapons operations that ends up extracting value from you, making the middle class poorer, and ending up with the large corporations that control the political process. And that's exactly what Zelensky is, and all of these puppet leaders like Starmer and Macron and all of these others that are just meeting up in order to steal money from the British people, the Europeans, as living conditions get worse and worse and worse because none of the governments are working for those people anymore. And as BlackRock is doing for America right now, I'll cover more of that in the macro section when we cover Trump's speech in Saudi Arabia. But essentially, Ukraine is saying that they're going to have a national Bitcoin reserve. But what are they going to use to buy that? Because they don't have reserves. They are no longer a sovereign state because BlackRock did a hostile takeover and is killing Ukrainians in order to extract as much value from that for the profits and using the proof of weapons network in order to achieve that. In the meantime, over back in America with the Trump administration, Eric Trump came out and says that there is a race to the top to accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible. So while I never listen to what people say unless their investments and their money matches it, and in this case, the Trump administration is buying as much Bitcoin through his family structures, including Bitcoin mining companies, including the launching of stable coins, including the launching of pump and dump scam meme coins in order to extract and end up with more Bitcoin. They're using every mechanism possible, whether it's stable coins and NFTs or meme coins or mining Bitcoin, anything they can do to get as much Bitcoin as possible for the Trump family, as is many other people in the Trump administration. And still, America doesn't have a Bitcoin strategic reserve. However, I believe BlackRock wants to break up America into parts, into separate states as an operation while they weaken Europe and destroy the UK, which is what they've been doing. And America's the next, or has been, a target as well. And so the states are starting to get Bitcoin strategic reserves approved. Now, it remains to be seen whether they'll start to use them, but it looks like they're sending more power to the states and less power to the Fed. But we shall see what happens. But you can see what those games are. But in the meantime, the politicians are accumulating as much Bitcoin as possible. And BlackRock is getting all of the banks and financial institutions and states that manage their money through BlackRock to get their Bitcoin positions built up as BlackRock transitions the world into this multipolar world order that I've been sharing for a long time now. Okay. Now, with Coinbase, there was a bit of a news announcement. And it's pretty interesting. And again, this plays into us understanding what's happening with artificial intelligence, so you can get ahead of it right now. But there was a ransom demand by some data hackers with Coinbase, where they were demanding $20 million in Bitcoin from Coinbase, and they were threatening to leak the customer data that they alleged they had acquired. And so the CEO, Brian Armstrong, decided to do an open source counterattack to the ransom, which I think is an interesting approach and strategy in this new digital world that we are going through. So publicly, CEO Brian Armstrong of Coinbase on his X account came out and said, we're not going to pay the ransom. And instead said that he would offer a $20 million reward for any information that people can give that leads to understanding the attack and would lead to the attacker's arrest. And so they put some conditions around that, but they came out and publicly disclosed what was happening. Now, what he said is that it was by targeting some of their employees from their offshore, outside of America, customer service center. And as a result, he said that they're going to be bringing in more of the customer support into America. But we know what that means. Anybody that has been following the AI side will know that it has been getting exponential growth, and the innovation of agents, where you can essentially employ an AI agent that can be programmed in order to fulfill a certain function, like build some expertise in customer support. I think that's what they mean. By re-onshoring into America, it is a political way of saying we're going to be replacing those staff with AI agents. And so that's what I think the strategy will be. And that is exactly the strategy that is being deployed with these quote unquote re-onshoring of the manufacturing base that we're going to be seeing within America at the moment, which means there's going to be significantly less jobs. And the interesting thing, and I'll tie this into the macro when we cover the announcements from Trump and from his Middle Eastern tour, is that they're saying this is the key selling point, that it's going to be jobs. And those are temporary jobs. So you need to protect yourself and understand the games that are happening. And I think that ties into what we may see, my speculation, when they say re-onshoring jobs. So I'll keep watching that trend. But I know that that's exactly what businesses are doing right now. And I believe that everybody should be treating this as absolutely urgent. You should be. I had somebody that came on a space yesterday and asked me about their 17-year-old son and whether he should go do a law degree. And my advice was, in 3 years, I think it's more likely that there won't be lawyers than there are getting any kind of return on investment in a law degree in the current environment. The exponential growth of artificial intelligence with agents and everything that's happening right now, everybody needs to treat it as a personal family emergency. I mean, if you have a son or daughter or children at that age, you really need to be educating them into artificial intelligence. You know, these universities and colleges, they have brands, but these are the final remnants of the pre-artificial intelligence world. They need to be getting their skills quickly, as fast as possible in AI, working with businesses that need to transition, utilizing the skills themselves, and disrupting traditional industries and colleges and universities rather than spending the next 3 years there. And as you make money through artificial intelligence, convert it into sovereign wealth, i.e. Bitcoin in self-custody, to protect yourself from these trends. Because as artificial intelligence becomes more programmatic into the future, we need to fight back with open source. We need to fight back with decentralized. And Bitcoin, the decentralized network, has proven what that looks like. And so you need to really be adjusting. And if you feel that's not for you, then treat it like a family, treat it like a community, and have your family meetings now and think, is my son and daughter going to be doing this? Am I going to be doing this? Or am I going to be working with somebody else in order to do this? But everybody needs to be doing this. And then they need to be saving in Bitcoin and building sovereign decentralized systems, or working with sovereign decentralized system. Or at the very least, if you're going to be working with those physical activities that are going to be replaced with robotics into the future, recognize there is a shelf life. And you need to be involved in the manufacturing base around robotics and AI, whether that's energy, whether it's natural gas, whether it's oil, whether it's semiconductor chips, whether it's data centers, whether it's steel manufacturing, for data centers and these component parts, whether it's building out these large data centers. Whether it's stable coins or software on top of artificial intelligence, whether it's Bitcoin mining, whether it's Bitcoin, this is where the world is going. And you have a few years. You should treat it as an urgency right now to get as much Bitcoin as you can by playing this trend, because you're alive at this time when we are, we're not going to see changes like this. And I believe in 5 to 10 years, you're not going to recognize the world as well as this switch to multipolarity. And in a multipolar world where there's not a dominance by one currency, the dollar, that's backed up by a proof of weapons network, I believe that Bitcoin will be urgent through that transition as the only digital hard money that exists on a distributed supercomputer that is like digital gold without the physicality. But also, you could own your own money, spend your own money, and a monetary policy that will never change. If you're not got your head around this stuff, get your head around it now and treat it as an emergency. Even if I'm wrong, I don't think I am wrong, but even if I am wrong, then at least you'll be prepared for this and ahead of the curve. Right, what else announcement did we have? On the Bitcoin side, we had an announcement from Dubai. Dubai is going to be partnering with Crypto.com in order to accept crypto for government services. So the governments are looking to get into that. This has been a thing that's been going on. I first pitched this to the UK government 12 years ago in 2013. Boris Johnson laughed me out of the room. We managed to get the Isle of Man government in 2014 to do it. And then the Bank of England did an attack saying, we'll ruin clearing to your island if you support this industry. And then later, when President Bukele did it with El Salvador, we started to get this trend. And then when the Trump administration, they're looking at Bitcoin as a strategy for the country. And obviously the Middle East has been building their Bitcoin strategic reserves, utilizing a mining already. And BRICS is now starting to clear trade between those countries that are building alternative payment system in an environment of de-dollarization. And then countries which are fully under the control that are being destroyed by BlackRock and their portfolio companies, they're not building Bitcoin strategic reserves like UK and Europe. So understand that these things are happening. You need to protect yourself. But at the sovereign level, the countries that are actually sovereign with sovereign wealth are seeing Bitcoin as a mechanism for being relevant as we transition to a world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs. At the same time, Abu Dhabi's sovereign wealth fund, they disclosed that they had, it's not the biggest position, but a $408 million investment in BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF. I expect that to continue to increase as we're seeing more and more of utilization. But I think the main thing they're doing is utilizing energy and engaging in mining. And so rather than just buying it through BlackRock, I think this is a token gesture whereby the Middle Eastern countries, as we transition to this multipolar world, if you watched my video last week, you'll know that I said they've been building economic partnerships where they remain sovereign, so they don't become vassal states like America, Europe, and UK to BlackRock, but they've been partnering with BlackRock, but remaining sovereign so that they can have relevance and economic influence in this multipolar world order, which is the strategy that's been developed. And so holding some of their Bitcoin with BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF is kind of this economic gestures as these negotiations happen, as the world is changed. Also, Binance founder CZ, I've covered CZ's story many times. Basically, it was shut down, or he was attacked by the Department of Justice, engaged in shady shit, had to flee China, then had to flee Japan, then had to flee America, essentially. And then eventually America, through the DOJ, managed to install their own compliance team. And then he started working with those in Middle Eastern, either Dubai, where he ended up, and then working with Abu Dhabi for his company so that they could get access to essentially the future of capital markets. Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund invested $2 billion in Binance, and they got approximately 270 million users, as Abu Dhabi is looking to become the center of capital markets using tokenized securities between BRICS, which is transitioning to their distributed ledger and Bitcoin-backed systems and clearing in these different stable coins and Bitcoin as well, while America builds this Bitcoin strategic reserves either at the state level or the federal level so that they can sit in the center of the world as BlackRock essentially manages transition. And BlackRock has said they're going to be launching a tokenized exchange. They're weaponizing their influence through the SEC to drive this along, their influence at the Trump administration and their influence in the Middle Eastern regions. And I can see when you follow the money, everything's being moved towards asset stripping the American capital markets and transitioning to tax neutral jurisdictions so that money can flow between BRICS and America as they use tokenization as the mechanism with stable coins so that they can essentially get as much Bitcoin as possible. Just like fiat currency was a mechanism for central banks extracting value so that they end up with the gold, and then they can move the gold around in order to influence geopolitical power. I think they're building their Bitcoin positions, and as long as you hold it in self-custody, then you're able to remain sovereign and do the same as them so that you can build economic power and influence this political process. But we need more sovereignty rather than handing over your power to BlackRock so they can become more powerful and then weaponize their power against you and your countries, as we are seeing right now. But anyway, Bitcoin founder CZ came out and said Abu Dhabi is the AI and blockchain center of the world. And we are seeing that, and that really leads into the macro section where we're going to be going through Trump's visit and the purpose of that. And so that is really everything that I've got for this week in Bitcoin in part 1 of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 81. And we're now going to move over to the macro section. Now, I'm going to go through the key macro indicators that we're looking at as we transition to this world of the multipolar world order that I've been forecasting, and some of the key indicators of that. And we're going to be doing that in the macro section. And then I'm going to be going through Trump's interview in Saudi Arabia, and I'm going to be deconstructing the bits that they won't tell you, as I often do, because people like it when I play these interviews and then give my commentary throughout it. So what I would love for you to do right now, I've been trying to get to 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, and we're starting to get more and more people that are listening to Bitcoin Hard Talk every week on Apple Podcast and on Spotify. So if you are not a member of, if you have not followed me on Bitcoin Hard Talk, so go over to Apple Podcast, type in Bitcoin Hard Talk, and also do the same for Spotify if you prefer that. Then you can follow me, and then you can download and auto-download episodes each week. You can do this in parts if it's too long. You can do it while you're in the gym. You can do it wherever you are, because I want you to have the information each week. I give up to 3 hours of content as I do this, but sometimes people like to break it into parts. I upload it to YouTube in 3 parts or 1 part if you want to do the whole thing. But we want to make sure that you're consuming the content. So please head over to Apple Podcast and Spotify. Follow me so that you can get those downloaded to your phone. And if you don't have the time, you can do it while you're at the gym. No extra time, while you're driving or whatever it is that you're doing. And please help me subscribe to my channel on YouTube, and also follow me on Rumble in case YouTube rugs us. We've noticed that suddenly we seem to have broken the shadow ban. So we're trying to get through 100,000 subscribers right now. We're at 95.2 thousand subscribers. So please, if everyone watching this hits it, the algorithm is showing us love. Once we get to 100K, we become a YouTube partner, and we can make sure this content gets out to a lot more people and they can be more prepared. So I'm just going to take some water before we move into part 2. And while we're doing that, please add a comment, do like, please repost and subscribe, and head over, put Bitcoin Hard Talk, and make sure that you're subscribed, because I've got more and more information, and it's getting vital as we make this transition. Now these technologies are going viral, exponential. And so I'll take some water. You do that right now. And then we're going to go through this week in macro in part 2, and this week in geopolitics in part 3. Okay, welcome back to part 2 of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 81. And we're going to be going through the potential. Has US sold itself? What does that mean? What is the announcements of all these deals? And if you've been watching all my previous episodes, you'll be very familiar with what these tariff policies are going to do, and how to actually read between the lines by following the money rather than listening to what the politicians and media is telling you. And so we're going to do this. I'm firstly going to go through all the key indicators and events that happened this week in macro, and then we're going to go through the video that from Trump's speech in Saudi Arabia, and then I'm going to stop it every 5 minutes or so and tell you the truth behind what he's saying and the bits that he can't tell you so that you can get yourself ahead of it. So first thing, we had the next phase of this tariff policy. So as a recap, I've said at the start of this that the tariff policy is actually a BlackRock strategy to transition to a multipolar world based upon the geopolitics that I'll cover more in the geopolitics section when I do this week. And it will have three effects. And Trump was there to deliver it. You know that I've always said this layer 3 structure. The central bank and its shareholders are at the top of the structure. The asset managers like BlackRock, and then they have access to intelligence. And rather than most of the budget being used for national security, most of it is used in order to help BlackRock portfolio companies and the large multinational institutions that have more power than governments. That's why we have this proof of weapons network. And then underneath that, you have the middle management, which is the government. And then you have the president, which has to receive lobby money and make commitments to those corporations and exert their strategy and then find an acceptable narrative and distract the people with left and right, distractions, thinking they have a democracy and capitalism when it actually is just an oligarchy and rule by money and control of that money and power at the top. And so once you have and understand that structure, I said that the tariff policy, I believe, was, a proof of weapons network strategy to strategically weaken the dollar, take all of the most valuable assets in America, and sell them to the partners in this multipolar world so that BlackRock in a new multipolar world can enroll different sovereign power structures like the Middle East, like China, into them having partnerships in managing this transition together. And that's what tariff does. It did it in three ways. Firstly, because the import tax is going to be paid by the importer, and America, with the world reserve currency, has to run a trade deficit and a fiscal deficit because it exports dollars around the world, and dollars are debt, and therefore its export is debt, and that is its business model. And any reverse of that without a monetary reform would send you into a depression. And so you can't change it with tax because you can't fix a monetary issue with a tax issue. And so all the tax does is it redistributes the wealth. And so the businesses that can't afford the import tax either have to put their price up or they have to just opt out of business and not getting any imports and wait to see what happens, or they have to reduce their margin. And normally that will lead to, if you make them wait long enough, that all of the key companies will be acquired and rolled over into the large corporations. That's impact one. So it's transfer from Main Street to Wall Street and consolidation, just like COVID was. That's the impact within America. And also consumers have to pay those higher prices in order to float that. Now, the second impact is that those large BlackRock portfolio companies are able to take the countries that are dependent upon BlackRock and the IMF, where BlackRock has been purchasing all land, ports, debt slavery through JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, IMF, take all of those hugely dependent countries, they can weaponize their currency and they can create distress scenarios and use this policy where the countries that have to export can also be merged and they can consolidate power into the very same institutions. They can also, the third impact is that all countries, as America is shrunk into a regional power, all of those countries realign their partnerships to the countries where they don't have tariffs. And so it drives people closer to BRICS, the global south, China, and that is the execution of the strategy. And we're not actually in a trade war. The trade war was already lost when America decided that it wanted to be world reserve currency and use the Federal Reserve System. And it was predictable after 1971, when it came off the gold standard, that the only way to keep the model going was to have wealth inequality, extraction of wealth, and the manufacturing base being built in China and various other jurisdictions. And you just run these bigger and bigger trade deficit and trade surplus. Fiscal deficit as well. And so that is the inevitable consequence of the model. If you go back to previous episodes, if you really want to dig into this, I deconstructed the Scott Bessent. I think it was Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 77. If you want to binge on this, you can catch up. I publish them all on my blog. So you can just head over to the blog and you can pick the ones, catch up, or you can get them all from Spotify and Apple Podcast as well. Okay, so those are the three impacts. Bankruptcy of medium-sized business and transfer from Main Street to Wall Street and BlackRock portfolio companies within America. Acquisition of the export-driven countries so that they get more dependency on the BlackRock portfolio companies. And also partnership with the sovereign nations that are not that have not sold their country to BlackRock and have built sovereign wealth. Partnership with them where they get to purchase all the key assets so that they can partner in this process. And then you drive those closer to BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South America, and the plus countries. And also the GCC, the Gulf countries that have the sovereign wealth. Right, so that's the transition in a summary. So what did we get this week? Well, we got a capitulation from the theater of the trade war, where essentially we got a 90-day period where China and America get to have the companies decide what they're going to do. And so they could get to put their prices up. They get to say for the next 90 days, while we've got a degree of certainty, we can decide to take the hit, eat into our margin, or we can get distressed and shut our business in that 90 days. Essentially, they have to become gamblers in preparing for how they do that. This means over the next 90 days, you get the impact of the increase in prices, and you get these different negotiations that the Trump administration will do for the very large influential companies that can be represented essentially by the guest list of those that actually attended the meetings in the Middle East. You want to see the power structure? Head over to my X where I actually listed. I did an X thread where I went through all the different people that are going to benefit from this, whether it be Citibank, BlackRock, whether it be Elon Musk through X, whether it be Howard Lutnick through Cantors. I went through each and every person, all the technocrats that were all there, and I had the guest list. And you can look through that guest list, and those are essentially the recipients of the BlackRock portfolio companies that will benefit from this. They get to negotiate the deals with the Trump administration, layer 3, for the benefit of layer 2 and layer 1, as we said, which is the banks and the multinational corporations. So by having that, you get to play the game. And if you want to change the game, you just escalate the narrative saying, hey, China's messing around. And then you can hike them up, hike them down, and you can control markets as you want to manipulate currency. And obviously, Scott Bessent is the currency manipulator that worked with George Soros to short the pound, crash the pound in the euro transition as well. So you got the perfect guy to do that with also, Howard Lutnick connected to the Federal Reserve as well. Okay, so what did we get the announcement? We got stability to pump the market after the crash of the market. And remember those videos with Trump where he was sat there with Charles Schwab saying, hey, how much did you make out of that tweet that I did out there? And he said he made $1 billion today and various other things. So US is now cutting tariffs on Chinese goods. And it went from this week 145%, which means nobody trade. And so that cuts off all the supply chains, to turning the supply chain on a little bit more. And it was to 30% for 90 days. Now, this is just enough to keep trade flowing, because America has to buy from China for the bits that you have to get from China, because it will take so long to rebuild the manufacturing base, and it will cause such an increase in prices as well. But this is just enough to create the inflation that is needed, or the increase in prices that is needed, but keep the trade flowing, but also have people trying to gamble on their business and become currency speculators and try and project into forward. So, the only ones that are going to do that is the large corporations. So the tariffs are there at 30% for 90 days for those in America that want to import from China. China then lowered its tariffs on the US, from 125% to 10% for 90 days. Sorry, I think I got that the other way around. US lowered it to 30%. China lowered it to 10%. So the imports are 10%, but China doesn't really need to buy anything from America, because it can just support its own local manufacturing base and local projects and trade with countries that don't have tariffs. So they can push strengthening of their industry in this transition. Obviously, a global recession will impact all, as we said, but you just get that optimum numbers to realign the world order and get that as well. As soon as that announcement came up, 2.2 trillion was added to the S&P and the financial markets. I'm sure people got to front run that trade as well. You make the announcement. You basically get to say, Trump says that they've capitulated. They're strong. They're knocking down our door. But clearly this was America capitulating. But that's all theater as well. But it's sending out the signals to everyone that's not involved in the theater as well. And so Trump comes out and says, China has agreed to open up the United States for trade and everything else. Essentially saying that China's going to ease some of the capital controls. Who wants that? BlackRock wants that for the portfolio companies, so that they can penetrate some of the China market and get more strategic influence over BRICS. And so that BlackRock's coming at multiple fronts, creating war in India in order to vassalize it, sell more weapons, and gain more control through loans, i.e. the I in BRICS, and then open up, use the Trump administration and try to negotiate the opening up of markets, and then work with the Middle East in order to get access to foreign direct investment into the creme de la creme of the BlackRock portfolio companies, i.e. the Meta Facebooks, the Chat GPTs, and various other technology companies, and X as well. So it is repositioning the entire economy so that you can have this partnership between BlackRock that controls Europe, America, and Britain, and partner and try and infiltrate BRICS led by China, and the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, led by Saudi Arabia and MBS. And this is the constructs of the multipolar world order, so that you have those three pools of capital that can then invest in the rising global south, and the vassalization and extraction of all of everything from America, as BlackRock did to UK and Europe, where essentially your politicians no longer work for you, they work for BlackRock. And that's what these Ukraine wars and various other things were, if anyone's been following my content for a while. So what's the narrative that then comes out from Trump? Trump, essentially, the US is the main proxy for BlackRock, and Trump is the main proxy for the narratives that need to come out and the changes that need to happen within America, where power shifts away from the government and over to BlackRock, just like it did in Europe and UK. And so Trump came out and said, Europe is nastier than China. So that's the kind of narrative you're getting. You're getting this, we're winning with China, the MAGA narrative that makes the people that don't watch Bitcoin Hard Talk think that this helps everyday Americans. And then you get the narrative between Europe and China to make to kind of push those narratives around how you want to realign the world order, because Europe is a vassal state for BlackRock, UK is a vassal state for BlackRock, and America is a vassal state for BlackRock as well, but with significant assets rather than that it wants to strip and consolidate power to as well. Also, Trump says that the US will send letters to countries for new trade deals. Essentially, this is the negotiations with the different regions in the multipolar world to come to America, so there's an efficient way to negotiate the best deals for BlackRock and the portfolio companies as well. There was also a narrative saying that Trump said that India has now offered zero tariffs on US goods. So there's a real narrative around, BlackRock that is, while it's pushing aggression between Pakistan and India through the US deep state, making sure that more and more deals can be done with India. And so it starts to announce these free trade deals. Now, whether they happen or not, it will just be manipulation, because they're trying to gain more strategic control over Modi by indebting the country, transferring wealth assets to the BlackRock portfolio companies so that they can then have more control over the brick side as well. Okay, so what were the key stats that we saw? Right. So US inflation measured by the Consumer Price Index, CPI, also the Producer Price X, PPI, it fell to 2.3%. This is lower than expected. So the market interpreted this as good news. And so the inflation is normalizing more to that 2%, but that doesn't include all the impact of the tariffs and the increase in prices, which I think will, over the next 6 months, when that data runs through and we get past these 90 days, you'll find out that that inflation goes to that 3% and beyond as well. And so this is how the Fed can say, we're not decreasing interest rates, leaving monetary policy as is, because we need inflation to get further into control, and it will worsen it. And then essentially, whenever you want to pull the trigger for the benefit after BlackRock has repositioned and they want to transition more fully to the multipolar world order, the Fed can just aggressively hike rates and say inflation was transitory, or they can pump the markets to try and get more wealth inequality out of middle-class Americans and over to those large multinational corporations. And the banks, they meet every quarter. Jerome Powell, that will be replaced in 2026, he's just a front man for saying the monetary policy that the banks want to do. And who are the banks? All of those shareholders, the largest shareholder in all of them is BlackRock. So you got both sides of this. And remember, BlackRock has the best technology through Aladdin, which the Federal Reserve uses for monetary policy and Treasury uses for managing its treasury policy as well, financial policy. And all the money managers around the world, they use it as well. So you can shift this data in order to shift capital to this multipolar world in order to get people to move money at the same time. Okay. What else did we get? Trump said that his Middle Eastern trip could bring in more than $10 trillion of potential investments. So to the MAGA American people, that sounds like great, $10 trillion coming into America. But what does that mean? No, it means the creme de la creme of assets are being sold off to countries in the Middle East that are remaining sovereign, so they can partner with BlackRock, that is a global institution that is transitioning the world into multipolarity. You also get to say to people that that's going to create hundreds of thousands of jobs. But we know anybody building their manufacturing base in America can't afford American staff. So this is all about inbound investment for artificial intelligence, robotics, to have non-human based jobs as agents is getting exponential and more of the technology is replacing humans with technology. And they also get to have some of that infrastructure in their own country, because those that control the data centers are the ones that are going to be the backbone of this transition. And the Middle Eastern countries are acquiring those assets, investing in owning those assets, and getting some of those assets in their own country. This is the asset stripping mission, because America has lost its sovereignty to BlackRock and has combined on that European, British, American bloc controlled by that structure. And so you get to see how ignore the narrative, follow the money, and it's the opposite of what you're being told, so that you can protect yourself. And that's my whole point of covering these things. Once you're not so gullible to the corporate, the politician narrative and the media narrative, because governments are only layer 3, you can start focusing on you. And you can either, when you've got economic power, you can engage in lobby in order to influence these systems, as was the case with the Bitcoin rich that now have got Bitcoin strategic reserve for their states. And once you understand that this is a battle between centralization and decentralization, you don't need to get wrecked into a universal basic income, powered by Elon Musk's social credit score and his SpaceX, which is powering Starlink, in this global structure that is not America first, while he pretends to be America first, while X is being used to perpetuate civil unrest narratives, regime change governments, and build social credit scores built upon stable coins, which is how they want to control and do this universal basic income when all the jobs get replaced. You got to get ahead of that. That's the point here. Because you don't have a country that is sovereign. You have someone that's maximizing for their portfolio companies to extract value from you. And you remain sovereign by boycotting the system, boycotting the Fed, boycotting BlackRock by not owning it through an ETF, boycotting the Fed by holding Bitcoin in self-custody, boycotting the banks by not taking on debt, and boycotting the large technocratic oligarch by spending local within your community and supporting decentralization rather than further centralization. That's how you win. That's how you benefit from the system. And then it's also how you get control back. Because at the end of the day, through boycotts and pushing out your money based upon it costing them money, that's why we had the influence on the military industrial complex that changed and switched this multipolar world order based upon making the countries that were engaging in the geopolitical events that I'll be covering and rendering those assets useless, so that BlackRock has to pivot their strategy based upon, at the end of the day, our economic power, because they want our money. And that's why we need more decentralized systems, so that we can have a check and control. Bitcoin in its essence is an FU to the system and a regulator of the regulator, so that we can bring sovereign power back to us as well in these macro shifts. And that's why you can't just do it short term. You need to get ahead of these trends. These are multi-year trends, and you need to be thinking in multi-years, not reacting to whatever they throw at you when it's too late as well. And they can say, oh, he's a conspiracy theorist. But by the time the conspiracy theory becomes conspiracy fact, it will be too late, because you need to prepare years ahead. That's what they do. Follow the money. That's what Bitcoin Hard Talk is designed to do. Okay, so let's go through the final bits, and then we're going to jump into the speech that Trump gave at the Saudi Arabia visit as well. So the announcement came out anyway, announcement after announcement. Saudi Arabia said that it's going to invest $600 billion in the United States. What does that mean? It means that they're going to purchase and acquire the best assets in America for $600 billion, push forward the AI and robotics race that will replace humans, and get as much of the data in their own country through reciprocal deals that involve purchasing more and more weapons from the military industrial complex, from Boeing, and supporting the BlackRock portfolio companies, but them still remaining sovereign because they don't have a debt-based Ponzi scheme. They keep their resources like oil and natural gas for their own people. They don't indebt people where you have to pay tax through debt enslavement. They have a non-riba-based and a non-interest-based financial system. And so therefore, they remain sovereign. And now BlackRock has to partner with them because they can't take over. And so they do that by building their wealth and then using their wealth in order to build economic power and diversifying away from some of that energy. The Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, says that he's working to increase US investments to $1 trillion that BlackRock will benefit from. It won't go into American people. And if they do get some jobs, you know where it's going: AI and robotics. Now, the second step on the tour was Qatar. Now, this is where everyone was freaking out because Qatar has been framed as this, when the narrative for creating war was the fake war on terror, Americans and Europeans and Brits were radicalized in order to hate Muslims. And that was to justify through operations like 9/11, which were, intelligence agency operations. And then that justified all the wars that would be for the profit. And this is how BlackRock gained significant power over that time frame. Now where they got $20 trillion of assets as a result of all these wars and vassalization of resources, a bit like the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company as well. Qatar has always been pushed as this place that funds, all the terrorism and ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the resistances and various other things. But all along, Qatar has had already for years, multi-decades, the largest US military base there as well. And they use organizations like USAID in order to fund where they want to push budgets in order to create violence in the Middle East. And so now suddenly there's a change in narrative. And suddenly it's hilarious to watch that all these influencers that said, hey, Qatar is funneling all money and they create all the terrorism, they're now finding out that it was America's strategy all along to create this divide and conquer in order to prop up the dollar and enslave the world through dollar enslavement. Suddenly, Trump's going there and they've got to flip the switch on the narrative. So he's now doing PR for Saudi Arabia, for Qatar, for UAE. And they're showing, hey, these countries have got sovereign wealth. They're incredibly wealthy countries. They're not, and you got this PR strategy as a result of that as well. Just so you know, Qatar only has like 250,000, civilian Qataris. They brought in like 2 million Bangladeshis and Indians and various others in order to build the country as they use natural gas. But what do they want? They want to use that natural gas for artificial intelligence, for electricity. And so they became the largest per capita GDP in the world. It has a bit of a two-tier system as a result. But they did their partnerships with Shell and various other countries. Now, what's happening? Now, when they originally, like Saudi, the reason that they still have this partnership with America and Qatar has this partnership with European companies like Shell is because when they were desperate to extract those resources, America, Britain came along, colonized, and after creating violence in the region and not allowing them to nationalize their resources, when they grew power, they nationalized half of it and gave half of it to the oil producing companies and gas companies across the BlackRock controlled companies and the West, let's call it. And in exchange for that, they had a lifetime deal where essentially, rather than paying them to build the infrastructure through contracts, they said, you've got to give us half of it forever. And this constructed into the petrodollar, and that created the demand for dollars. And then that created the investment to lend that money to, rather when you have dollars, you don't keep them in a bank. you buy treasuries and bonds so that you receive yield on it. And then that was lent to the government. And then they use covert wars through these mechanisms in order to create violence in the Middle East so it can never become powerful. But they kept their resources. They kept their sovereignty by never having a debt-based Ponzi scheme and a central bank. And then they built sovereign wealth. And now America is maxed out on its credit card. Essentially, it has to go to the sovereign wealth, and they have more power in this negotiation in order to shift the world order. And that's what we're witnessing right now. Well, anyway, Qatar's sovereign wealth, there was an announcement that it plans to invest $500 billion in the United States. Now, remember, these will be larger negotiations. They've been negotiating over multi-decades. This is them acquiring the assets, which gives them influence through foreign direct investment, which extracts the returns over to this industry, while they can have influence in order to get their energy so that they can sell more of their oil and more of their gas as they get nuclear deals. And by having nuclear, they can have nuclear energy that can power all of these artificial intelligence data centers for next to free in order to, and America needs, they don't have enough energy because they've got 350 million people, whereas Saudi has 35 million people. America produces the most amount of oil, and now they export it to Europe because they blew up Nord Stream pipeline. But the 35 million people in Saudi, they don't need all that, and they almost on par in terms of America's the largest, and in Saudi second. And so therefore they get to export more, which allows them to control the price of oil, which gives them that power when they want to change the price of oil. And they work with OPEC plus, which is Russia and the various other countries like Qatar, in order to have their network as well. So in the end, all of this centralization is about, manipulating interest rates at the Fed, controlling the amount of debt through debt-based Ponzi schemes, and controlling the access to resources through these covert games. And at the very top of that, representing Europe, America, and Britain is BlackRock, State Street Vanguard, and the sovereign wealth funds. And that's where we've hit as well. So Qatar also signs a $200 billion agreement with the US to buy 160 Boeing planes, and said one of those planes will be to replace Air Force One for Trump. And then after the Trump administration, the asset gets transferred over to you. And this is the largest order from Boeing in history. And you can bet your bottom dollar when Trump wants to stimulate, the Federal Reserve will print the money. And this is about making sure that money goes in to these contracts of the large companies and the BlackRock portfolio companies. Next stop was UAE. And so they had arms deals and various other deals for the military industrial complex. The UAE came out and said it wants to invest $1.4 trillion. Now, look, it doesn't mean these things are going to happen. These were memorandum of understanding. You get the whole thing of signing it. But now you get strategic power where you do essentially what the IMF did to the rest of the world. You only release the funds when it comes to the conditions that you want. And this is how Britain lost its sovereignty. Britain was essentially the Qatar investment fund, owns Harrods. It owns 20% of Heathrow Airport. It owns much of the real estate. It goes to Keir Starmer. Who did Keir Starmer have meetings with? He has meetings with Zelensky, an agent for the military industrial complex. He has meetings with the Qatar Wealth Fund about how they're going to allocate, and what he needs to do for his backers. He also has meetings with BlackRock. And so Keir Starmer works for BlackRock, works for the Qatar Sovereign Wealth Fund, and works for, the other pools of capital, and doesn't work for the British people. I'm telling you this because this is what's happening to America. And what it leads to is the complete depletion of all of your infrastructure and the games of manufacturing civil unrest when you want to change the market. This is why you need to protect yourself. Own more Bitcoin each month, go sovereign, understand the trend, earn as much fiat currency with the trend, and don't listen to politicians so that you can build your economic influence to become sovereign and influence the process later. Anyway, it said that this is going to be an investment in the United States over the next 10 years. It doesn't mean in US, it means with BlackRock portfolio companies. Another BlackRock portfolio companies that is instrumental in the data centers is NVIDIA, which announced it's a strategic partnership with Humane to build AI factories in Saudi Arabia. And so they need that data and those factories and those robotics to be built across there. They will partner with the manufacturing base in China, and then they can export this while they build global capital markets in tax-neutral jurisdictions ready for a tokenized stablecoin, Bitcoin AI, and plug in the global CBDCs or stablecoins around the world through this multipolar world order, and use that to receive yield, buy Bitcoin, and build Bitcoin wealth, and then transition efficiency and energy by using Bitcoin mining. This is where we're headed for. If you're on the right side of this, great. If you're not, it's going to be the worst time ever. And you'll be on UBI by the end of it. Okay, so it's all about artificial intelligence. It's all about energy. Now, that's why we have the narratives around nuclear. And that's why you're told Iran cannot have a nuke. They frame it as if they're about to take over the world and install, Sharia law around the world. And Putin wants to take over. He's the next Hitler. He's going to take over the whole of Europe. And they're trying to kill all the Jews. And so we must stand with Israel and all those different narratives. But these are just narratives. Because nuclear is about nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is about powering artificial intelligence. And that's why America is being sold off slowly to the new power structure of the world, because BlackRock is in charge, and BlackRock wants a multipolar order as well. And so Trump came out after this trip and said, we are in various serious negotiations with Iran for long-term peace. Remember what I said, because of this deals between BlackRock, Saudi, China, BRICS, GCC, you can now have peace in the Middle East, because that's what these investments are about, is about allowing for growth and decolonizing the Middle East from America. And I'll be going through more of that in the geopolitical section as well. But what was the impact of Iran saying, we're going to have a nuclear deal? Well, immediately, oil prices plummeted by 4%. And that was the result. Why? Because the market sometimes is dumb. The market doesn't realize that all of this oil and natural gas gets around anyway. It just goes through covert means. Because Iran and Russia demonstrated that they can beat sanctions and still survive. Now, of course, it impacts the economy. And the impact is that sanctions are used as a weapon to have an uprising and destabilize a country, which sends it into chaos, like in Syria for the last 13 years. And so that's what sanctions are. It impacts the poorest people. Those are the rich. They find their mechanisms around it. And then the government has less resources for people. And then you can spread narratives that make people incredibly upset. Then you have an uprising, a current revolution, and then you can overthrow the government and install your own puppet government. And then rather than nationalize, you take all the resources and you use them for the BlackRock portfolio companies, and then you install a debt-based Ponzi scheme, and you can control through debt slavery the rebuild and push it into war. That's the model. And so, we've seen that that's what these sanctions do. That's the result of them. But Brent crude went below $64 as a result of the announcement, because the market didn't factor in that this oil and gas is already going around anyway. There's a dark fleet and businesses all around the world that can get these through. And guess what? BlackRock is a part of that, and the deep state, whatever. But they're shipping Russian and Iranian oil globally. It involves essentially governments, it involves armies, it involves intelligence agencies, and it involves numerous militia groups. So whenever you see things like Al-Qaeda or ISIS or M23 or M13, that is these groups, government, state-sponsored, that are able to use these militias in order to get resources around the world based upon these covert wars. And 9 times out of 10, through the black op operations of weapons trafficking, human trafficking, drug trafficking, you can have the black op banking network that funnels these money through for the benefit of the global hegemon and creating US proof of weapons network, and then controlling media to make radicalize people into making it think it's something else. But remember, there has already been 16 rounds of sanctions on Russia already, which is why when Trump is threatening Iran with another round of sanctions and another round of war, this is all theatrics, because we are moving to normalization, as I'll cover more in the geopolitical section I've covered previously, between Iran for nuclear energy that is normalizing with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the GCC countries, and eventually that will have a free Palestine as well as part of the condition, because it partnered with BRICS, China, and Russia. I'll go through more in the geopolitical section as well. But anyway, look, I used to work in corporate finance. Before 2006, I worked in markets, and my last job was working in investment banking. And I can see, this was before the financial crisis. I left in 2006 to become a monetary reformer and focus on giving lectures and lessons around the world on monetary reform, and then build and invest in alternative technologies that led me to Bitcoin and various other things. But I know exactly what an M&A mindset looks like. I know how we used to do this. The best time to strike on an M&A deal is when you essentially have a country in distress and you carry on the negotiation for years and years and years, and you have what's known as negotiation fatigue. And so once you can get to distress and fatigue, then you can get the best type of deal, and you can get that deal done. These have been negotiated over a long time frame. Then the economy suddenly, I recognize this exactly how this unfolds. You basically implement tariffs. Tariff sends a distress that speeds the negotiation at the end of fatigue. And now essentially Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and UAE are able to get the best deal possible. They've made all the smart moves. And this is why, we're now finally seeing less of the covert wars in the Middle East, and we're seeing escalation to de-escalate as well. So rather than negotiating with America decolonization, they decided, let's just buy the whole game. BlackRock owns America, BlackRock owns Europe, BlackRock owns UK, and Israel was the covert operation in order to create all of the violence. And so let's build our sovereign wealth over a multi-decade strategy. And now we can get rid of Israel. They can become a normalized state in the structure with Iran, with a free Palestine, with the GCC. And they can buy the whole game while they get the creme de la creme assets of America. And they basically get to play this new game in partnership with the new power structure that emerged. And that's what I think we're seeing. So Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar, they have essentially bought peace in the Middle East. They have asset strips, some of the key assets. They now get to host the most important asset, which is data. And they get to be a part of the robotics and artificial intelligence that would take away many of that. And what does Trump do? Trump says, we bring in $10 trillion. And what is the number of debt that Trump needs to roll over? $10 trillion. And what's happening with the interest rates on that debt? That's going to be rolled over with 10-year treasuries and 30-year treasuries. It's going up. It's over 4.5%. So the cost means that BlackRock is vassalizing America with a higher interest rate in order to negotiate more power while it rolls over that debt. That is going to be used through stable coins and the BlackRock portfolio companies. This is the hostile takeover of America, which was the hostile takeover of Europe and Britain that we see. Europe and Britain is the beta. They have essentially UAE, Qatar, GCC, in partnering with BRICS and partnering with America, they have bought now irreversible influence, and they're able to negotiate with each release of capital, and that is as America transitions to this technocracy. And of course, they'll do the same with China as well, because now they have built in the middle of the world relationships with China and BRICS, relationship with BlackRock, i.e. with America, Europe, and UK controlled by BlackRock underneath, and partnerships in this lethal game in the multipolar world order that we're transitioning to. Opt out with Bitcoin. They're all going to be using Bitcoin as, I believe, the asset that they'll be getting as we go through this. And this essentially is the price for moving, for having this new partnership, is that Palestine will have to be free. And they recognize that the only way to get here is to not fall for the old tricks, divide and conquer. And so Iran normalized with Saudi Arabia, and that was China's plan. We'll go through more of that in the geopolitical section. This is exactly what 6D chess looks like. That is 6D chess, and that's been a long-term game. And I think they essentially is the game that we're seeing right now. And that's the power structure we've been covering. Okay. Right. Now, what I want to do is move over to the video right now. Follow the money. And with that understanding, we can now move over to the video. And then we're going to do the final section this week in geopolitics. And so, Azad, if you're there, let's go through Trump. The beginning part of it, which I've cut through, he basically just gave his usual America spiel in front of the Saudi Arabia audience. And it was very similar to like his campaign rally where he says about Biden and all the usual things. So I won't play that again. But what I'm going to do is now play chunks of this, and then we're going to go through the history so that you can understand exactly what the reality is. And then we'll go through the geopolitical section as well, so you can get ahead of everything. So Azad, let's start the video.
True. But critics doubted that it was possible what you've done. But over the past 8 years, Saudi Arabia has proved the critics totally wrong. The transformation that has occurred even by these incredible business leaders. I mean, you had the biggest leaders in business anywhere in the world standing right before us. But the transformation that has occurred under the leadership of King Salman and Crown Prince Mohammed has been truly extraordinary. Such a thing has, I don't think, ever happened before. I've never seen anything at that scale happen before. And I guess, maybe you could say the United States is doing pretty well too, but I don't think too many people have seen that happen before. Majestic skyscrapers, the towers that I see, the difference between now and 8 years ago. And 8 years ago was very impressive, but the towers that I see rising, some of the exhibits that I was shown by Mohammed, what I've seen there is just an amazing, it's an amazing process, amazing genius of so many people, architecture, but I have a feeling I know where many of those ideas came from. Happens to be sitting right in this room right before me, but the towers and all of the different, I've seen a lot of different towers. I didn't think there's any version of a tower that I haven't seen in one form or another. I just passed 4 exhibits. I have never seen anything like any of them. So it's going to be very exciting. And they sit among the ancient wonders of a growing and exciting city. It's really amazing. Riyadh is becoming not just a seat of government, but a major business, cultural, and high-tech capital of the entire world. The World Cup is here. Johnny, just stand up, John. Johnny, thank you, Johnny. Great job, Johnny, great job. But the World Cup and the World Expo will soon be coming here, just like the World Cup is coming to the United States. It's going to be really exciting next year. The engines of Formula One racing now roar through the streets of Jeddah in a historic milestone. Other industries recently surpassed oil. Think of it. All of your other industries now have surpassed oil. I don't know if a lot of people will understand what that means. It's so big to make up a majority of the Saudi economy for the very first time ever. So think of that. Other industries are now bigger even than oil, which is always going to be a big monster. It's a big one. But that's a great tribute to you and economic development properly used. In other cities throughout the peninsula, places like Dubai and Abu Dhabi, Doha, Muscat, the transformations have been unbelievably remarkable. Before our eyes, a new generation of leaders is transcending the ancient conflicts of tired divisions of the past and forging a future where the Middle East is defined by commerce, not chaos, where it exports technology, not terrorism, and where people of different nations, religions, and creeds are building cities together, not bombing each other out of existence. We don't want that.
Okay, let's take a pause there. Right. All right, so what we're seeing here, there's some key important things to understand there. This is the repairing of the brand damage by the West, where essentially they're saying in this transition, remember, BlackRock is the top of the Western power structure. Trump is negotiating for all of the BlackRock portfolio companies. Tariffs is the mechanism for transferring to a multipolar world order. And he is now repairing the relationship because through years and decades of PR, the West has colonized and destroyed the Middle East. You know, death after death, bombing after bombing, funding a terror, all of the narratives, these were manufactured by the Brits and by the American empire. And so now he's repairing their reputation with everybody knowing what actually happened here. But the Middle East needed to, in order to decolonize itself, it needed to play them at the economic game. And now they're at the pinnacle of now having economic power. And so Trump is saying, all right, now that BlackRock is moving over to this multipolar world order, I need to put my money and invest it with the Middle East. And so if you look and follow, Trump has set up a fund with Harry Kushner, funded by Saudi money. And you saw announcements that there's going to be Trump Tower in Qatar, Trump Tower in UAE, Trump Tower in Saudi. So while Trump is shorting the dollar with stable coins through his family, buying Bitcoin and transitioning into Bitcoin for his own family, no Bitcoin strategic reserve for the state yet, rebranding the Middle East after decades and decades of saying these are Muslim terrorists, now rebranding and saying, you know, even though many of these covert operations, and Saudi basically had, if you've seen any of my threads on how ISIS was created, it was Western influence in order to radicalize and create groups that have no connection to Islam and the Quran. And then they created, CIA created books of like how to manipulate all the text to make them sound like violent extremists. And then they created word like Islamists. and then they had extreme sects called like Wahhabism, and these Wahhabis were, leaders that would tell people what their religion is, and then these groups would get funding, and they would go and perform these operations on behalf of the West to destabilize regions. And we saw that with, for example, when, Afghanistan, for example, the West would fund these groups, which later became Taliban, which later became, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, rebrand them. They would take these groups, and that was to incite the Soviet Union to come out, create violence in the region, and create multiple decades so that the Black Op operation could take over the poppy seeds in order to get more drug trade in through the CIA and the deep state into getting certain regions in America addicted to drugs so that they could then have this whole network that served the corporate interest that was set up. And then the military could make loads of money from it. And then you could create the narratives in order to radicalize people, radicalize the Christians to join the army in America, and create later these fake war on terror. And Israel was an essential part of this so that you could ensure that there is no competing power for the US dollar proof of weapons network. So all of that happened, all of this that was created. And now suddenly, because the Middle East has built enough economic power, while organizations like United Nations would never give a free Palestine in order to make sure that there's always violence, and all of the violence that has been created for that. And it was always America that would veto vote for any type of peace. And then these covert operations. Now suddenly, the game has been played where you're allowed to show the world that actually Trump admires all these buildings and people don't have to pay tax because they remain sovereign and they were able to invest in their infrastructure, invest in their people, and show that, they had their own model, we had our own model, and then contrast that side by side. You've got Europe, UK, and America that sold all their assets through financialization, created massive wealth inequality, and now there's no infrastructure. You've got infrastructure that's just essentially none of the wealth is used for American people or British people. And now the power structure that sits above it means that governments are just owned and bought and paid for, and salespeople for the military-industrial complex, big pharma, banking, and all of the BlackRock portfolio companies. And so you get this severe contrast. But now, the narrative that is going to be seen by American people is to build up the reputation because now they have economic power. Okay, let's go to the next part of the speech.
And it's crucial for the wider world to note this great transformation has not come from Western interventionists or flying people in beautiful planes giving you lectures on how to live and how to govern your own affairs. No, the gleaming marvels of Riyadh and Abu Dhabi were not created by the so-called nation builders, neocons, or liberal nonprofits like those who spent trillions and trillions of dollars failing to develop Kabul, Baghdad, so many other cities. Instead, the birth of a modern Middle East has been brought by the people of the region themselves, the people that are right here, the people that have lived here all their lives, developing your own sovereign countries, pursuing your own unique visions and charting your own destinies in your own way. It's really incredible what you've done. In the end, the so-called nation builders wrecked far more nations than they built, and the interventionists were intervening in complex societies that they did not even understand themselves. They told you how to do it, but they had no idea how to do it themselves. peace, prosperity, and progress ultimately came not from a radical rejection of your heritage, but rather from embracing your national traditions and embracing that same heritage that you love so dearly.
Okay, let's put a bit of commentary in here. So this is just sheer gaslighting. Essentially, you had two models in the Middle East. You either capitulated to the demands of the colonizers, Europe and America, and Britain, and if you did that, then you had that model of massive interventionism, and you had to figure out how to not have a central bank that would take over your currency, and you were able to keep your nationalization of resources. And when a country tried to nationalize their resources and oil, you had the CIA overthrow them like they did in Iran and replace a democracy with their own government, which later led to revolutions and various other things. And so, on the back of that, that's what these models are. You had British colonization, Portuguese, French, and American colonization. And now they're able to decolonize because America has got 125% debt to GDP. The Federal Reserve has wiped out the wealth from middle-class America and made sure that all the assets are controlled by a small number of people. And who's wealth managing all of those? It's now transitioned to BlackRock, and then you can use investment bank to financialize and securitize everything. And then banks get a special subsidy, and then they want to globally hedge. And so you have these technocrats and technical companies that they built up using military technology. And now they're able to spread those globally in order to turn America into a technocracy, sacrifice Europe and Britain, and take all that colonial power up to this stateless power structure that means that countries no longer serve their people. And I've seen what this means in terms of homelessness, in terms of inciting civil unrest, in terms of weaponizing resources for wealth and equality. I told you, UK is the beta test. They don't pick up the rubbish anymore. All of the money goes over to corrupt politicians in Ukraine, which goes back to the military-industrial complex. And you just get lied to time after time. And when they want more control, they use border policies in order to influence because the politicians work for them. And then they use narrative control in order to incite civil unrest. And then you end up with new laws, arrests, making examples of people. And then they use that in order to change laws so that you lose your freedom of speech and you can arrest protesters, and send them to prisons in El Salvador or whatever it may be, or arrest them in Guantanamo Bay, and then challenge the First Amendment so that you can get people angry and favor certain classes in order to create the environment that's needed to usher in a stablecoin social credit score in America or a central bank digital currency in Europe, so that you can then programmatically use the social credit score connected to Elon's Starlink in order to make sure that when people use their second degree, their Second Amendment, that you're able to control in such an environment and put those that don't have Bitcoin, that haven't figured out how to use artificial intelligence to earn as much money to save in Bitcoin and build sovereign power, everyone else will be on a universal basic income throughout this. I think we're going to witness that transition together because BlackRock's in charge of the West. We need this multipolarity, and we need decentralized and Bitcoin so that we can actually regulate the regulator and have a check and control. Because the one thing I learned from this story of how these countries became powerful is they were only allowed their freedom when they could beat them at their own economic game. And the only reason they're getting this transition right now is because the debt-based Ponzi scheme has asset stripped, and these countries remained sovereign. And the lesson from that is you will get to do that with Bitcoin. And so I just want to make sure that you capture that lesson of what's happened from here. Let's move to the next phase.
You could do. You achieved a modern miracle, the Arabian way. That's a good way. Today, the Gulf nations have shown this entire region a path towards safe and orderly societies with improving quality of life, flourishing economic growth, expanding personal freedoms, and increasing responsibilities on the world stage. After so many decades of conflict, finally it is within our grasp to reach the future that generations before us could only dream about, a land of peace, safety, harmony, opportunity, innovation, and achievement right here in the Middle East. So beautiful. It's such a beautiful thing that's happening. I guess, the people that are here can't even really appreciate it because you see it happening, and it's when you come to a place that you haven't seen in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years that it's even more incredible. When I left office just over 4 years ago, that future seemed almost impossible, what you've done. Together we had obliterated the killers of ISIS. We wiped them out, terminated its founder and leader, al-Baghdadi. We had healed the divide in the Gulf Cooperation Council, it's a very big deal, and united the nations of the region to stand against the enemies of all civilization. We'd imposed unprecedented sanctions on Iran and starved the regime of resources to fund terror. They were unable to fund anything because they had no money left. They had no money. But the new administration came in and let them have a lot of money, and you saw what happened. It was not money well spent. And with the historic Abraham Accords that we're so proud of, all the momentum was aimed at peace, and it aimed very successfully. It's been an amazing thing, the Abraham Accords, and it's my fervent hope, wish, and even my dream that Saudi Arabia, a place I have such respect for, especially over the last fairly short period of time, what you've been able to do, but we'll soon be joining the Abraham Accords. I think it'll be a tremendous tribute to your country, and it will be something that's really going to be very important for the future of the Middle East. I took a risk in doing them, and they've been an absolute bonanza for the countries that have joined. The Biden administration did nothing for 4 years. We would have had it filled out. But it will be a special day in the Middle East with the whole world watching when Saudi Arabia joins us, and you'll be greatly honoring me, and you'll be greatly honoring all of those people that have fought so hard for the Middle East. And I really think it's going to be something special, but you'll do it in your own time, and that's what I want, and that's what you want, and that's the way it's going to be. When I left office, the only thing still standing between this region and its unbelievable potential was a small group of rogue actors and violent thugs seeking constantly.
Okay, let's pause that one there. Right. So this is the change that people need to understand. So if you don't know the history, essentially there was a nuclear deal in place before Trump from the Obama administration, which was essentially that Iran was allowed to have a nuclear energy play, and Iran built such a weapon for defense because it was surrounded by U.S. bases, which was the history of the fact that the CIA interfered in Iran, and they wouldn't allow them to nationalize their oil. And then once they did nationalize their oil, there was a revolution to make sure that those resources could only be used for their own people, and decolonize Iran. And so from there, you are fed a narrative which makes you think that Iran is always trying to colonize the world. But in order to gain, after sanctions and various other things, some kind of economic ability to in the region, it started funding different groups that were fighting against Israel taking over those states, whether it be Lebanon, whether it be Yemen, whether it be the Gaza and the Palestinian cause. And then those groups, Hezbollah, Houthis, and Hamas, are in the Western mind connected with the groups that the West created, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. And those groups are then, in your mind, told that they're just irrationally trying to kill the Jewish people, when Israel was created in order to radicalize the Christians through 9/11 into justifying all the wars, to steal gold, steal oil, destabilize, take over the countries they want to take over, weaken, get IMF loans, destroy currencies, destroy wealth, kill people, rape, massacre, and pillage, and fear countries that do not capitulate into partnering and propping up the dollar, which is obviously what Saudi did eventually. They partnered with America to utilize and say, right, you get 50% of the oil. I mean, that's crazy. Imagine doing a deal where in order to build out, you get 50% forever. Like, that's wild. But anyway, that's the only way to get it done in those days when they didn't have the economic power. And so then these groups that America created and Israel created through their intelligence agencies, we're told to believe that when they want to eliminate them, or when they want to take over a region and destabilize it, America says they're fighting terrorism. And so when Trump came along and said, yeah, we're fighting, we took out ISIS, essentially this is about controlling resources. And who did Trump assassinate? Qasem Soleimani. Qasem Soleimani was the person that was funding the resistance against illegal occupations and takeover by US foreign policy funding Israel, which made trillions of dollars for the military industrial complex at the expense of Americans, because Americans paid through all the inflation. And then the money was printed, and then that money went back into military contractors in order to fund forever wars, where the goal was never to end the war. The goal was to take over as many resources, prevent countries becoming powerful like they are today, so that there is no competition. And then you feed back this narrative that you're fighting terrorism, which essentially created a radicalized nation that hate all Muslims. Muslims are like, I don't support ISIS. What the hell is this? And then you even get Jewish people to join the IDF and start ethnically cleansing and killing Palestinians by radicalizing them to because you don't want them in your country. And so you say, you're not safe in our country, go over to Israel. And then you have to join the IDF and you have to engage in all that violence that causes divide and conquer, people hating each other. And then, Qasem Soleimani was the person that was killed more ISIS than anyone. So that's why he got taken out. And so, when you don't know the story, then this moved over to Abraham Accords. What was Abraham Accords? Abraham Accords was getting a bunch of people that were vassalized by IMF debt slavery, where they destroyed the wealth, like Lebanon and Egypt and Turkey, by weaponizing their currency and making them take on IMF loans where they had debt that could never be repaid, and military bases, and forcing partnerships in order to prop up the demand for the dollar. And then you violently overthrow governments through engineered strategies like Arab Spring by funding, funding or getting money to groups like the Muslim Brotherhood that then push that narrative. And then you can take out the leaders you don't want and replace them with leaders you do want. You see this strategy all around the world today. It's still being done. It was done in Bangladesh. It was done in Pakistan. It was tried to be done in Venezuela. They tried to do it in Brazil. Like, we've seen this. You can recognize the pattern again. And so Abraham Accords was a mechanism for taking those that had normalized with Israel and getting Saudi Arabia to normalize, but sidestep Iran. And then Saudi Arabia said, we will only join if you give a free self-determination to the Palestinians, as per the 1967 borders, which was a war that was fought in 1967, and Jerusalem as the capital for Palestine. And the only reason that didn't happen is you had Oslo Accords and these fake attempts at trying to solve it. And then you had Mossad and CIA blackmail operations to blackmail Bill Clinton, make sure, like through Mossad and Jeffrey Epstein and various other networks, to make sure that Palestine's never free. And then America at every United Nations would veto vote, because they're on the Security Council, to ensure the freedom can never happen. But then you paint an alternative narrative as if they're rejecting all the deals and that type of stuff. And you connect that to the terrorism for any resistance, because international law states that if a region is occupied, by law, you are allowed to have an armed resistance against an illegal occupation, and you have to provide aid for those that are in the occupation. And so all the international law protects that. And then you sue, and what did he do? He sanctioned the ICC court when somebody brought the case against for the illegal occupation, and then handed over Jerusalem by putting the Israeli or the American embassy in Jerusalem, and then allowed for settler expansion, which creates and fuels the violence. And then you sidestep Iran through Abraham Accords, and you don't allow for a Palestinian state. And the only thing that stopped that was Saudi Arabia said there has to be a Palestinian state for us to normalize. That then leads to the environment that led to pushing Iran pushing harder in order to gain more power and have more resistance. And that led to October the 7th. And prior to that, what did they do? Trump tore up the nuclear deal so that you could push sanctions on Iran, so that you could push them into enriching more uranium as you surrounded it with more military bases. You could say that they're trying to build a nuke to take on the world and implement Sharia law, and they're crazy. And then you could try and install an uprising by having, selective narratives put out there, like pretending you care about women's rights in Iran while you're killing women in Gaza. So no consistency, but you just select the narrative, and then you have immigrants that don't want to be a part of that. Maybe they don't like the Iranian government or regime. They move to America, and they become a fifth column so that you can push out the people that hate Iran to try and overthrow the government, so that you can then turn it into something like Syria, which always leads to regime change, worse outcome, more deaths, more destruction, which is always the goal. That was the neocon strategy. And so Biden was essentially the last neocon. The neocon was the strategy of propping up the dollar through war, death, and destruction. And the Abraham Accords was peace dressed up in a kind of a neocon strategy, but Trump actually isn't a neocon. But that was essentially the result. And now we end up with the situation we're in today, where China came along and said, I'm going to normalize between Saudi Arabia and Iran, get them to recognize that all this violence means that you can partner with us and BRICS and the GCC, and everyone can come together as one unified front. And then when we have power over America, we can collectively decolonize, have a Palestinian state, have an Abraham Accords with Iran in, which was my prediction by following the money. And then we can regime change within Israel, and it can return to something that looked like what it did before the colonization, where Jewish people, Christians, and Muslims all lived in peace because they didn't really care about immigration back then. They just cared about colonization. And that led to all the violence and all the manufactured narrative and all the stuff there. So my prediction is that we're going to move towards Abraham Accords 2, and all the escalation and all the violence you're seeing right now and all the things, I covered this last week, is that there will be an Abraham Accords 2, and it will have an Iran nuclear deal, Saudi nuclear deal, in order to power all of that artificial intelligence through nuclear energy, and Palestine state and America retreating. In the geopolitics section, I'll go what I've always covered for peace in the Middle East. But that's why he's pushing that story. Now he needs to slowly introduce the two next things, which is what's the future with Iran and what's the future with Syria. So Azad, let's go to the next part of the video.
And into havoc, mayhem, and indeed into war. Unfortunately, instead of confronting these destructive forces, the last U.S. administration chose to enrich them and empower them and give them billions and billions of dollars. The Biden administration, the worst administration in the history of our country, by the way, spurned our most trusted and longstanding Gulf partners, and I can say partners worldwide, one of our great, great partners, no matter who we look to, and we have great partners in the world, but we have none stronger and nobody like the gentleman that's right before me. He's your greatest representative, greatest representative. And if I didn't like him, I'd get out of here so fast. You know that, don't you? He knows me well. I do. I like him a lot. I like him too much. That's why we give so much, you know? Too much. I like you too much. Great guy. They lifted sanctions on Iran in exchange for getting nothing, and sent the regime tens of billions of dollars to fund terror and death all over the world. And they laughed at him. They laughed at our leader. And they're still laughing at our leader. They thought him a fool. And they made nothing but trouble ever since, including the funding of October 7th, one of the worst days ever in the history of the Middle East. Horrible day. Biden removed the Houthis from the list of foreign terrorist organizations, even while missiles and drones were being launched right here at your beautiful city of Riyadh, and launched at ships if they happened to be sailing in the wrong location. The Biden administration's extreme weakness and gross incompetence derailed progress toward peace, destabilized the region, and put at risk everything we had worked so hard to build together. And when you think of the great achievements that you've made, to do it in light of a pretty hostile administration, an administration that was not a believer, it makes your achievements even greater. Makes them even greater, you know that. But in a few short months since taking office, we have achieved the swift return of American strength at home and abroad, now working with the vast majority of people in this region who seek stability and calm. Our task is to unify against the few agents of chaos and terror that are left and that are holding hostage the dreams of millions and millions of great people. The biggest and most destructive of these forces is the regime in Iran, which has caused unthinkable suffering in Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, Iraq, Yemen, and beyond. There could be no sharper contrast with the path you have pursued on the Arabian Peninsula than the disaster unfolding right across in the Gulf of Iran. Think of that. They wanted to name it that. I said, they're not going to let them do that. Do you mind if I stop that? I stopped it. We're not going to let that happen. While you have been constructing the world's tallest skyscrapers in Jeddah and Dubai, Tehran's 1979 landmarks are collapsing into rubble and dust. They had it going for a little while under a much different system, but those buildings are largely falling apart, falling down, while you're building some of the world's biggest and most incredible infrastructure projects, buildings, all sorts of things you're building that nobody's ever even seen before. Iran's decades of neglect and mismanagement have left the country plagued by rolling blackouts lasting for hours a day. All the time you hear about it. While your skill has turned dry deserts into fertile farmland, Iran's leaders have managed to turn green farmland into dry deserts as their corrupt water mafia, it's called it the water mafia, causes droughts and empty riverbeds. They get rich, but they don't let the people have any of it. And then, of course, there's the key difference at the root of it all. While the Arab states have focused on becoming pillars of regional stability and world commerce, Iran's leaders have focused on stealing their people's wealth to fund terror and bloodshed abroad. Most tragic of all, they have dragged down an entire region with them. Countless lives were lost in the Iranian effort to maintain a crumbling regime in Syria. Look at what happened with Syria. In Lebanon.
Okay, let's take a quick break there. So, or a quick commentary. This is the sheer gaslighting. When you don't know the history and you're fed a narrative of lies, and maybe Trump believes them. But the neocon model and the dollar model was the world's largest exporter of terrorism and violence around the world. It was picked up by the British Empire, and it was handed over to the American Empire. So take a look at all of those different regions. And for, secondly, we're moving on. Like, there is a new multipolar world order, but I just want to, help you understand so that you can stop falling for the lies that you're being told. So Iraq was essentially Iraq and Iran. Both sides of that war were funded by America. There was a weapons for hostage swap line. There was a funding of Iran through US weapons. And there was Saddam Hussein, which is essentially a CIA asset that at some point was working your agenda. And then America decided to turn against it, was pushed into a war in 1980. With Iraq and Iran, and you were funding both. America was funding both sides, printing money, stealing money from the American people, and handing it over to the military-industrial complex. That's that one. Lebanon, 1982, CIA coup. The CIA coup, in order to install a pro-Western government, so that it would take IMF loans and take the corporate military-industrial complex proxy America. And then America would use its proxy, Israel, in order to invade Lebanon and then fuel sectarianism by manufacturing a narrative where suddenly people just had slightly different religious beliefs around Shia and Sunni, but you would get them to fight each other by funding militia groups like ISIS and then connecting that and creating and fueling sectarian division, and then weaponizing Islam versus Christianity versus Judaism by when Britain tore up the lines and tried to make it where the region would never be able to unify, and by fueling covert operations to create death, destruction, and violence, then that's what happened to Lebanon. And yes, all of the money was stolen and the savings were stolen from the people when they could no longer afford the US debt, when currency raiders crashed the currency, shut down the central bank, and even blew up the alternative banking system, which was debt-free interest loans backed by gold. And yes, that was the reason that America blew up Libya, when Gaddafi wanted to reunify the union to be able to actually use their own rare earth minerals and their own gold and their own resources so that they could actually build up a manufacturing base rather than using child exploitation labor and giving all their resources over. They wanted to build a gold-backed pan-African currency. So you had to wipe him out. You had to take down Gaddafi. Now, if they're a dictator, all the goods, that's better, in order to make sure that Africa could never actually have their resources, build a manufacturing base, and rather than just you taking the resources, they could actually say, no, we would like you to come to our country, create jobs, and build the finished product here using our resources so that we can actually grow, because so much of the resources are in the Middle East and Africa. And we could actually build up, some economic power. Rather than partnering and doing that, which is exactly what China's doing through the Belt and Road Initiative, building up so that you can partner and build products, build factories, build infrastructure. You want to do IMF debt slavery so that no one can do that. So you can just take the resources and prop up the dollar through debt slavery, which turns against, through a debt-based Ponzi scheme, the American people as well. And so you had Lebanon that was mentioned, Iraq. So we destroyed those through war for the profits of military-industrial complex. Lebanon as well. We'll cover Syria in a bit. He was about to cover Syria. Iran destroyed as well through interference for those resources. What about Yemen? Same type of operations. And so you can get Iran and Saudi Arabia in proxy wars against each other. That violence makes sure that there's competing powers. You fuel that violence always. And then you have, different militias create the greatest humanitarian crisis in history, sell a bunch of bombs, give them to deals with Saudi Arabia. Then Saudi Arabia is in the US proxy war with Yemen, destroys the whole country, humanitarian crisis, sanctions, starvation, terrorism, categorization in order to destroy, so that divide and conquer can happen. And then Iran funds a resistance against that, in Gaza and Palestine and the West Bank, funds a resistance against that in Lebanon, funds a resistance against that in Iraq. Of course, they're using this for their own aspirations to become a power in the region as well. But then you push out all the narratives that tries to fuel colored revolutions, because you don't care about human rights or women's rights or any of those things, because you're just selectively using it. And then all of these wars creates refugee crisis, and then they can be used for destabilization campaigns, and illegal immigration can be used in order to get down wages. And then when you don't want a destabilization campaign anymore, you engineer a strategy to close the border and use a tariff policy to say we're rebuilding our manufacturing base, and recognize that then you don't have the people to rebuild the manufacturing base, because an iPhone will be so expensive under American labor, and America doesn't want to do that labor. So then you need the illegal labor. So you cause more wars that creates the refugee crisis in the first place, and then you can fuel racial tensions. Whenever you want to change laws and get people behind certain, removals of rights. And this is the model. And the whole thing is PR'd to believe that it's something. But if all you do is follow the money, you can understand what a psyop it is. And I could go through more and more regions. Take your pick. Pretty much every war was manufactured and people died in order to prop up either the Great British Pound or the dollar. And we were fed a bullshit story that we were exporting democracies. Okay, so I think we're going to do Syria, and then we're going to close this section, and then we'll do part 3, everything this week in geopolitics. So Azad, let's go to the last section.
Pillaged the hopes of a nation whose capital, Beirut, was once called the Paris of the Middle East. Can you imagine? All of this misery and so much more was entirely avoidable, absolutely avoidable. And Mohammed knew that. He knew that. Smart people knew that. If only the Iranian regime had focused on building their nation up instead of tearing the region down. Yet I'm here today not merely to condemn the past chaos of Iran's leaders, but to offer them a new path, and a much better path toward a far better and more hopeful future. As I've shown repeatedly, I am willing to end past conflicts and forge new partnerships for a better and more stable world even if our differences may be very profound, which obviously they are in the case of Iran. I have never believed in having permanent enemies. I am different than a lot of people think. I don't like permanent enemies, but sometimes you need enemies to do the job, and you have to do it right. Enemies get you motivated. In fact, some of the closest friends of the United States of America are nations we fought wars against in generations past, and now they're our friends and our allies. I want to make a deal with Iran. If I can make a deal with Iran, I'll be very happy if we're going to make your region and the world a safer place. But if Iran's leadership rejects this olive branch and continues to attack their neighbors, then we will have no choice but to inflict massive maximum pressure, drive Iranian oil exports to zero like I did before. If you know that, they were a virtually bankrupt country because of what I did. They had no money for terror, they had no money for Hamas or Hezbollah, and take all action required to stop the regime from ever having a nuclear weapon. Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. But with that said, Iran can have a much brighter future, but will never allow America and its allies to be threatened with terrorism or nuclear attack. The choice is theirs to make. We really want them to be a successful country. We want them to be a wonderful, safe, great country, but they cannot have a nuclear weapon. This is an offer that will not last forever. The time is right now for them to choose. Right now, we don't have a lot of time to wait. Things are happening at a very fast pace. They're happening right here. They're happening at a very fast pace. So they have to make their move right now, one way or the other. Make your move. As I said in my inaugural address, my greatest hope is to be a peacemaker and to be a unifier. I don't like war. We have the greatest military, by the way, in the history of the world. You know, I rebuilt our military in my first 4 years and rebuilt it into the most powerful military there is. And you saw that when I knocked out ISIS in 3 weeks. People said it would take 4 years, 5 years. I did it. We did it in 3 weeks. Just days ago, my administration successfully brokered a historic ceasefire to stop the escalating violence between India and Pakistan. And I used trade to a large extent to do it. I said, fellas, come on, let's make a deal. Let's do some trading. Let's not trade nuclear missiles. Let's trade the things that you make so beautifully. And they both have very powerful leaders, very strong leaders, good leaders, smart leaders. And it all stopped. Hopefully it'll remain that way, but it all stopped. I was very proud of Marco Rubio and all of the people that worked so hard. Marco, stand up. What a great job you did on that. Thank you, J.D. Vance, Marco. The whole group worked with you, but it was a great job. And I think they're actually getting along. Maybe we can even get them together a little bit, Marco, where they go out and have a nice dinner together. Wouldn't that be nice? But we've come a long way, and it could be, you know, millions of people could have died from that conflict that started off small and was getting bigger and bigger and bigger by the day. I've also been working relentlessly to end the terrible bloodshed between Russia and Ukraine, and very importantly, talks are being held in Turkey later this week, probably on Thursday, and they could produce some pretty good results. Our people are going to be going there. Marco's going to be going there. Others are going to be going, and we'll see if we can get it done. 5,000 people, young people for the most part, soldiers from Ukraine, soldiers from Russia. They're not from here, and they're not from the United States, but they're souls. They're souls. I think usually, mostly, they're young, beautiful souls that left their parents waving goodbye, left their brothers and sisters. Goodbye, I'll see you soon. And they got blown to pieces. 5,000 on average a week are dying, and people are dying elsewhere in the region, but tremendous numbers like we haven't seen since World War II are dying, and I want to stop it. I want to stop it. It's a horrible war. Would have never happened if I were president. That's a war that would have never happened. October 7th would have never happened if I were president, because Iran had no money to pay Hamas or anybody else. They had no money. They were not looking to take care of them. They had to take care of themselves. They had no money. We stopped their oil effectively with the embargoes and sanctions. But let me take this opportunity to thank the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for the constructive role that you've played in facilitating the Ukraine talks. And it really is, you've been amazing. You've made everything available to us. Thank you very much. Thank you. And if we get that settled, we'll pay a special tribute to what you've done. You really did lay a great groundwork. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. The West should not be dragging itself backward into another endless war in Europe, yet another endless war. We should stop the killing and work together to address the biggest long-term threats as one unbeatable team. Think of us as an unbeatable team. I mean, when you look at what you've done here, that's much more difficult than stopping stupidity. Think of it. It's stupidity. What you've done is much more difficult, and you did it better than anybody else has ever done it. As President of the United States, my preference will always be for peace and partnership whenever those outcomes can be achieved. Always. It's always going to be that way. Only a fool would think otherwise. In recent years, far too many American presidents have been afflicted with the notion that it's our job to look into the souls of foreign leaders and use U.S. policy to dispense justice for their sins. They loved using our very powerful military, and now it's really the most powerful it's ever been. We just are getting a budget approved, $1 trillion, highest budget we've ever had in history for military, $1 trillion. And we're getting the greatest missiles, the greatest weapons. And, you know, I hate to do it, but you have to do it because we believe in peace through strength. You have to have the strength, otherwise bad things could happen. But hopefully we'll never have to use any of those weapons. Seems to be an awfully big waste of money if you're never going to use them, but hopefully we'll never have to use them, because the destructive power of some of those weapons are like nobody's seen before. I believe it is God's job to sit in judgment, my job to defend America, and to promote the fundamental interest of stability, prosperity, and peace. That's what I really want to do. I will never hesitate to wield American power if it's necessary to defend the United States or to help defend our allies. And there will be no mercy for any foe who tries to do us or them harm. We will have no mercy. They understand that. That's why I've been pretty lucky. A lot of people think, you know, he's looking to fight. He's looking to fight, and things get settled. It's an amazing thing when they really think you mean it. But we do. We have the greatest military, the strongest military, stronger than any. Nobody's even close. We have the best weapons in the world, but we don't want to use them. If you threaten America or our partners, however, then you'll be faced with overwhelming strength and devastating force. We have things that you don't even know about, you don't hear about, and if you did, you'd say, wow. In recent weeks, following repeated attacks on American ships and freedom of navigation in the Red Sea, the United States military launched more than 1,100 strikes on the Houthis in Yemen. As a result, the Houthis agreed to stop. They said, we don't want this anymore. It's the first time you've heard that from them, too. They're tough. They're fighters. But just days ago, we were asked to cease targeting commercial. They were not going to be targeting commercial ships in any way, shape, or form, or anything American. And they were very happy that we stopped. But we had 52 days of thunder and lightning like they've never seen before. This was a swift, ferocious, decisive, and extremely successful use of military force. Not that we wanted to do it, but they were shooting down ships. They were shooting at you. that were shooting at Saudi Arabia. We don't want them shooting at Saudi Arabia if that's okay. So we hit them hard. We got what we came for, and then we got out. Since January 20th, the U.S. military has terminated 83 terrorist leaders operating across Iraq, Syria, and Somalia, including ISIS's #2 global leader. You read about that just recently. With the help of Pakistan, we apprehended the ISIS terrorists responsible for the attack on 13 American service members at Abu Dhabi, that horrible, horrible disaster. During this Afghanistan withdrawal, you know, that's another thing that we don't even think about so much anymore. 13 died, but 42 were horribly wounded. But hundreds of people died overall, because I count the people on the other side. Hundreds of people just grossly incompetent. It's probably why Putin decided to go into Ukraine, something he never would have done if I were president. But we wouldn't have had the problems of October 7th if I were president. We wouldn't have had Ukraine, Russia if I were president. We wouldn't have had Abigate, because there wouldn't have been any reason we were getting out, but we were getting out with dignity and with strength and power. But the way they got out was not good. I think it was the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country. And we've been working tirelessly to bring back all hostages held by Hamas. We brought back a lot already, but we're bringing back more. This weekend, we successfully negotiated the release of the last American hostage, Edan Alexander. Just came out a few hours ago, and we continue to work to get that war ended as quickly as possible. It's a horrible thing that's taking place. All civilized people must condemn the October 7th atrocities against Israel, which would never have happened again if you had probably a different president, but definitely if you had me as president. The people of Gaza deserve...
So I didn't realize it was that long, but I think it's really important for people to go through that. I just want to have a bit more commentary. We'll see how much longer it is. I thought it was going to cover the Syria section, and then we'll move into the final parts of This Week in Geopolitics. And I'll go through that a bit faster as well. But the point here, I wanted to cover some keywords to understand that. The first one, Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. That's the important word, nuclear weapon. It didn't say that it can't have nuclear energy. It didn't say that it can't enrich. It said it can't have a nuclear weapon. So to me, this is a capitulation based upon the China plan. We'll go through it more in the geopolitics of the normalization between Iran and Saudi Arabia that led to the GCC and BRICS unifying, that meant America had no choice but to allow for the Iran nuclear deal to be returned, which will be probably very similar. And the whole thing is about BlackRock, who is calling the real shots, saying we would like a Middle East where we can invest in nuclear energy, powering our artificial intelligence. And therefore, we need peace and stability in the region so that we can pour more investment while we give you a bunch of assets from America of the creme de la creme of artificial intelligence and robotics, and you can pour in all of the nuclear energy that's needed in order to bring in this technocracy in America. And rather than fueling violence, we'll tell the military-industrial complex, you can't profit from war here anymore. So we'll regime change Israel. We'll do this normalization agreement. Trump, his Abraham Accords 2. Read this script. You get the Nobel Peace Prize. And it was China's plan all along. And we're working with BRICS and China anyway into this new multipolar world. So we're going to reallocate capital. And the way we do that, Trump, talk about tariffs. Implement tariffs like this. And then we can reset the world order. You can be that regional power technocracy. And that's how we reposition all of our assets accordingly. We take ETF assets, we invest in the global south, and that's how following the money helps you understand what's really happening here. So nuclear weapon was the first one. So my prediction based upon that is there will be normalization for nuclear in both Saudi and Iran as per the China plan. At the same time, because there is no violence to be had in the Middle East, Israel as an asset is no longer useful to America. And so BlackRock will then hand over control of Israel, economically weaken it, and hand it over to the GCC. The GCC, led by Saudi Arabia, will then essentially be able to acquire all of the strategic assets in Israel, including all the technology needed, that the equivalent in Tel Aviv of Silicon Valley can be acquired in distress. Those that don't want to live there anymore, they can go wherever they want. But we'll just turn it into a normal region where we don't weaponize violence. We don't recruit people to the IDF to kill Palestinians. We don't radicalize American Christians into believing they need to protect Israel rather than the prophet Israel and the tribe, and change all those narratives to make people violate the Ten Commandments and have this radicalized evangelical Christian subset. And we don't do the fake war on terror, because now the narrative is no longer we hate the Muslims. The narrative is we like the Muslims and we want to work with the Muslims. And the fake resistance that created all the radical, but not fake resistance, the fake terrorism that caused the resistance, we can now have it where they get to, have a safe region, and we can stop all of these extreme narratives. And therefore, the need for Iran to fund the resistance goes away. And so Iran stops that. We normalize the region. And the more land that Israel conquers right now, because we don't care about, BlackRock, America, Israel, we don't care about the humanitarian crisis. We don't care about the fact that we are raping, pillaging, and massacring right now as we speak. The massacres in Palestine, if you're not following what's happening in Gaza right now, it is undeniable. Over 2 months of weaponizing starvation, massacres, taking down hospital infrastructure, clearing the land so that Trump Tower can be rebuilt on the beachfront. And no, America won't be owning it, because GCC has now got itself where it managed to beat America at its own game. It managed to decolonize because America needed its money, and it had to get in bed with the devil and normalize with BlackRock. But thankfully, because it hasn't have a debt-based Ponzi scheme or central bank, and it managed to utilize its resources, it is able to remain sovereign and create a competing force in a multipolar world. I don't think BlackRock wanted it this way, but the 5G chess was played because what was China's plan? If you remember way back when I started covering the geopolitics section, I'm just going to combine it into geopolitics and macro in one. We're going to end very shortly rather than doing a part 3. But if you remember, I said there are 3 things that are required to achieve peace in the Middle East once I studied and understood the game. The first is you normalize between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and that's exactly what China did. They used their diplomatic ties in order to normalize. The second thing you need to do is you need to resolve the Palestinian cause, and you need to allow self-determination for the Palestinian people. And so the GCC, I believe right now, will be strategically acquiring parts of Israel, and slowly it will become an Arab majority, and people will be able to live in peace, and there'll be a transition phase as per Abraham Accords too. The resistance played their role. Egypt did not allow for the ethnic cleansing. Jordan did not allow for the ethnic cleansing. And it's all because the GCC unified with BRICS, and rather than allowing America to divide and conquer, it got together and said there is a better vision for the world, and they built enough sovereign wealth in order to work with those that are going to be asset stripping America and asset stripping Europe and Britain, as is being done right now. That is the second part. So firstly was normalized between Iran and Saudi Arabia, that don't make those unnatural enemies. The second was to resolve the Palestinian cause. And the third was for America to get the hell out of the Middle East. And that's what Trump is there to deliver. America, you focus on being a regional power. It's the global hegemon. It never protected the world. All of those wars were created. All of those were unnatural. All of those were crimes against humanity. And just because South Africa managed to get the backing of BRICS and bring to trial in the United Nations that this was a genocide and that this was an illegal occupation, and because all of the protesters got together, all of those that were putting out protests, all of those that were creating content across YouTube, all of those that beat the algorithm to help people understand the truth that this whole thing was unnatural, and it's been the worst thing for the Jewish people, the Muslim people, and the Christians. It's radicalized. There was nothing stopping Jewish people immigrating to Palestine in the first place. They were welcome. They just didn't welcome the colonialism and the death and the destruction and the illegal settlements and the radicalism and the terrorism and everything and all the unnatural wars and everything that came from that, including anybody that supported this, like JFK himself. Anybody that tried to stop the neocon war strategy would be taken out. Mossad, Israel, proxy, America, proxy, Fed, BlackRock, supporting proxy, the Black Op operation, the layer 2, the layer 1, and the banks and financial institutions that profit from war and reallocate resources. I hope this all makes sense to you right now. But the third thing was America needs to exit. So I believe over time, what you have just witnessed with this speech is the handing over of America destabilizing the region after Britain carved up the land and the French colonizers and the Portuguese colonizers wouldn't allow it to happen. And now the Middle East is going to allow for this. Abraham Accords 2, Trump gets his Nobel Peace Prize. But we know it was actually BRICS, GCC, China normalization strategy. Russia pushed against the BlackRock infiltration of Ukraine. And this is all about energy and resources in the first place. And because AI is coming along, everybody needs to reset the chessboard, set the world up into multipolarity, and recognize that China's model is not a neocon model. America will still be power as a regional with its technology, and it will become a technocracy. Europe will be sacrificed into a surveillance state with central bank digital currencies. The GCC will remain sovereign, and those that are not sovereign will be under the power of regional. And guess what? You may not like it, but your neighbors are going to treat you better than the outside forces and the funding of covert operations and all the unnatural violence, because there is way more better when your neighbors for you to actually have a stabilized region and be able to utilize your resources. And BRICS and China will be able to invest in building infrastructure because nobody can build it faster at this stage. And they can use all of the US technology, and energy can be utilized. And that is way more profitable for those that invest in this industry, because I believe that in the end, the neocon model has died and Trump was there installed to deliver the message. And that is what is leading to this sea change. And Israel and Zionism for weaponizing Jews to create ethnic cleansing is desperately trying to conquer as much land as possible, because they have gone off the script. Because right now, US, Iran, GCC, they are aligned. And BlackRock has put together a strategy. It's a dangerous strategy, but it's the only strategy that could be implemented, because all of the violence only ever led to one result: that America was able to prop up the dollar, and they will create more wealth inequality, and they handed over all this power to this stateless, with no constitution, no Senate, no judicial, that now rules a massive part of the power structure and doesn't give a shit about the Europeans, doesn't give a shit about the Americans, doesn't give a shit about the Brits. And that was created as a result of this. And now we have this normalization. And I believe that we're going to see strategic tension. And Palestine will be free. But many, unfortunately, right now, the massacres aren't stopping. Because here's the cold, hard brutality of this situation. They want more war in Ukraine. They want to print another $1 trillion because that's what makes more profit for BlackRock and their portfolio companies. So they need to keep that going on in Europe. And that's why it's not working. Syria was essentially funded militia, ISIS, ex-ISIS, ex-Al-Qaeda. Turkey funded that. There is a struggle between Israel and Turkey. Trump lifts the sanctions. The oil that the Kurds occupy is essentially, we'll find out who's going to be able to use the oil, who's going to be able to use the wheat. And, it is just a vassal state. And so there is powers from Russia, there is powers from Turkey. And whatever happens to Israel when they're economically weakened, I think this will just end under the control of the GCC, that will have a nuclear program. America will strategically retreat. Iran will have the same, and they'll have a buoyant industry across the region that everybody can benefit from, just like Singapore, that was able to create new regions and expel the colonizers eventually, even though it had proxy leadership. And so these areas get to resolve themselves. Tariffs was the mechanism for resetting the world order. China was the mechanism for creating BRICS. Saudi was the mechanism for creating sovereign wealth in the GCC. And it was China's plan that implemented, but Trump says to say he did it and call it Abraham Accords 2. That's the path, the only path that I can see to Palestinian self-determination. There will be no war with Iran, as I have been warning people. The only reason that there may be a war with Iran is if Israel has more power than BlackRock. And I think BlackRock has more power than America and Israel and Europe and England. And MBS managed to infiltrate a part of BlackRock by getting a board seat through Saudi Aramco and the sovereign wealth that they built up in this time when America's got 125% debt to GDP, and they need to reset the board, and everybody needs to protect themselves. And the lesson is you remain sovereign. You remain sovereign by building sovereign wealth. We boycott the system by not borrowing and not allowing the debt-based Ponzi scheme to persist. We save in Bitcoin so that we can remain sovereign. We don't save in Bitcoin ETF so you can make BlackRock richer. And we decide what our money is going to do by making sure that we allocate our money to community. We don't fund these networks that are perpetuating. We take control of our money and we build economic wealth so that we can influence the system, so that we can play the 6G chess. Because the cold, hard reality is we are in a battle between centralization and decentralization, and we need decentralized artificial intelligence, decentralized identity. We've got decentralized money, and you can own that money, you can spend that money, and nobody in the world can change a monetary policy. That's why BlackRock had to capitulate to working with the GCC, working with BRICS. And that's why there's wars in Pakistan and India, because they're trying to vassalize India to infiltrate BRICS. It's a dangerous game. It's multipolarity. Countries can build their Bitcoin strategic reserve to fight against it. But even if they don't, you do that too, because I'm telling you, artificial intelligence over the next decade or less is ushering in a world where tax won't be able to be collected by governments. States won't be relevant. Jobs will be replaced. And they want you on a universal basic income. And your job is to utilize these trends, be proactive, defund as much fiat currency that you earn, save it in Bitcoin, and reallocate that money by building economic power. And always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Some are going to get wrecked and be on UBI. Others are going to do incredibly well. I think those that are doing well are going to be sovereign through building their own Bitcoin and holding it in self-custody. We can transition from here with peace, love, and unity but we're swimming with sharks. I'll keep covering the game. I'll keep covering it week after week so that we can follow the money and recognize the patterns before they happen and build a community of those that have got Bitcoin wealth. Because eventually the only way you win this game with peace is to have an economic power and enough people that understand the game and enough people that aren't dumbed down and enough people that are harnessing artificial intelligence. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. You got to play with the game. You got to win them at their own game. And the way you win, from everything that I've learned, is they only listen to the one God that they worship, which is money and economic power. And they utilize ideologies in order to make you fall for the shit they want you to do. You know, whatever your religious belief may be, I believe in God. I believe that the plan happens as God puts through. And I think we can transition to this with peace. But if not, then make sure you build your economic power. And I'll keep covering this every single week. And that's going to be everything for Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 81. We combined part 2 and 3 together in This Week in Geopolitics and This Week in Macro. And I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll be back this time next week. Please do me a favor. If you would like to get this content, I want to keep covering what you need to know, what they won't be telling you. At the moment, it appears that the algorithm is working in our favor. The more comments we have, the more likes we have, more retweets, the more shares. Let me know. I'll reply to your comments as well. The more we have of that, the more we're going to get to that 100,000 subscriber mark. I'm about to pass 200,000 followers on X. And we're now building the podcast so that you can listen to this in your own time and you can download it. You can drive at the same time. So follow me on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And also, in case we get censored, we've got 2 backup strategies. The next one is Rumble. Follow me on Rumble. They seem to censor less. And we also back this up on the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. That is a free portal on simondixon.com. Create your username and login. You can get a free digital copy of my book, the first published book in the world to include Bitcoin. You can get my Great Depression of the 2020s video series. I shared how I'm investing. I'm going to be doing another one in 2026 to help people protect themselves through this, understand how to self-custody, all of these various things. And also, we back up every single episode of Bitcoin Hard Talk in case any of these networks get taken down. And so that's going to do it. And I'll see you this time next week for Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 82. Peace.